She was a ruthless billionaire who thought money could buy anything, even a joke about her own heart. Stranded on a stormy highway in a sabotaged hypercar, she looked at the grease-stained single dad towing her ride and smirked. "Fix this impossible machine by morning and I'm yours." It was just a sarcastic taunt. She didn't expect him to actually do it, and she certainly didn't expect this desperate, broke mechanic to uncover a corporate murder plot, saving her empire and her life. The rain was coming down in sheets, slamming against the asphalt of Highway 101 like handfuls of gravel. Declan Wright wiped the grease and rainwater from his eyes, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel of his battered tow truck. At 32, Declan had the kind of rugged, exhausted face that told a story of hard miles and heavy burdens. He was a master mechanic, a man who could listen to an engine purr and tell you exactly which cylinder was misfiring. But right now, his only concern was finishing this shift and getting back to his 6-year-old daughter, Maria. Maria was his entire world. Ever since his ex-wife, Vanessa, had walked out on them 3 years ago, leaving behind nothing but a stack of unpaid bills and a shattered family, Declan had worked his fingers to the bone. He took every late-night call, every dangerous recovery job, just to keep the heat on in their small apartment above his struggling auto shop. His radio crackled. "Dispatch to Wright. Got a code 4 stranding up on the ridge. High-value vehicle. Customer is... well, she's being difficult. You close?" Declan sighed, keying the mic. "I'm 10 minutes out. Send the coordinates." When Declan pulled up to the ridge, the flashing amber lights of his truck illuminated a sight that didn't belong on this treacherous, washed-out mountain pass. Sitting dead in the mud on the shoulder was a customized, midnight blue Koenigsegg Jesko, a $3 million hypercar. Standing outside of it, huddled under a useless designer umbrella and wearing a soaked Armani trench coat, was a woman who looked ready to murder someone. This was Serena Croft. At 34, Serena was the CEO of Croft Innovations, a titan in the tech and logistics sector. She was notorious in the business world for her icy demeanor, her razor-sharp intellect, and her utter lack of patience for failure. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., she was scheduled to sign the final paperwork on a multi-billion-dollar merger that would cement her legacy. But right now, her million-dollar toy was a brick, and the most powerful woman in the state was freezing in the mud. Declan stepped out into the downpour, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. He didn't care about the designer clothes or the blindingly expensive car. To him, this was just another job. "Evening," Declan said, his voice a low rumble over the storm. "Let's get you in the cab where it's warm, and I'll hook this up." Serena glared at him, her dark eyes flashing with frustration. "Do you have any idea what this car is? You can't just hook it up with that rusted piece of junk. If you scratch the carbon fiber, your insurance won't cover a fraction of the door panel." Declan didn't flinch. He walked past her, shining his flashlight under the low front lip of the hypercar. "I've towed vintage Ferraris and armored bank trucks, lady. I know how to use a nylon strap. Get in the truck before you catch pneumonia." Serena opened her mouth to argue, but a crack of thunder silenced her. Shivering, she relented, climbing into the passenger seat of his tow truck. It smelled of stale coffee, old leather, and a faint hint of vanilla, a scent she would later realize belonged to a child's air freshener hanging from the mirror. 10 minutes later, the Koenigsegg was safely secured on the flatbed. Declan climbed into the driver's seat, dripping wet. "My mechanics in the city told me the engine control unit completely locked out," Serena snapped, wrapping her arms around herself. "It just died, no warning. I have the most important meeting of my life in 9 hours, and my phone has no signal up here. I need this car running." "It's midnight, and the roads down the mountain are flooded," Declan said calmly, shifting the truck into gear. "I'm taking you to my shop. It's safe, and I've got a landline. But as for the car, if a Koenigsegg ECU locks up, you need a proprietary factory computer to even read the code. It's a paperweight until Monday." Serena let out a bitter, mocking laugh. The stress of the merger, The paranoia of her cutthroat corporate life and the sheer exhaustion of the night boiled over. She looked at this gritty, stoic man who seemed entirely unimpressed by her. "A paperweight," she scoffed. "You know, the men in my world claim they can fix anything for the right price, but you just give up." She leaned her head back against the worn seat, a cynical smirk playing on her lips. "Tell you what, tow truck man, you claim to be a mechanic. Fix this impossible machine by morning so I can make my meeting, and I'm yours." Declan kept his eyes on the road. "I don't play games, lady, and I definitely don't want you." The rejection, delivered so flatly and without a hint of hesitation, hit Serena like a physical blow. No one spoke to her like that. No one dismissed her. For the rest of the agonizingly slow drive through the storm, the cab was dead silent. But Serena's taunt hung in the air, a reckless, sarcastic dare that was about to change both of their lives forever. Declan's shop, Wright and Daughter Auto, was a cavernous, drafty cinder block building on the edge of town. When he pulled the flatbed inside and lowered the massive bay doors, the howling storm was finally muffled. Serena stepped down from the cab, looking around in dismay. The shop was clean but undeniably humble. Tools were meticulously organized on pegboards, and a half-restored classic Mustang sat in the corner. It was a far cry from the sterile, brightly lit exotic car dealerships she was used to. "Phone is on the wall by the office," Declan said, tossing his wet jacket onto a stool. "Dial 9 to get out." Serena practically ran to the phone. She dialed her chief operating officer, Gideon Shaw. Gideon was a smooth-talking executive who had been her right-hand man for 5 years. He was the one who had insisted she take the mountain route tonight to avoid the paparazzi gathering at the airport. The phone rang and rang. Voicemail. She dialed her private security detail. Voicemail. Frustration mounting, she slammed the receiver down. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "No luck?" Declan asked. He had already changed into a dry gray t-shirt and was circling the Koenigsegg, his eyes scanning the aggressive lines of the hypercar. "They're probably asleep, comfortable in their penthouses," Serena said bitterly. She walked over to where Declan was staring at her car. "You're wasting your time looking at it. Like you said, without the factory computer you can't bypass the firewall." "I don't need a computer to see this," Declan said quietly. He pointed his flashlight at the rear wheel well. Serena leaned in, squinting. Just behind the massive carbon-ceramic brake rotor, a thick bundle of wires hung loose. They hadn't just frayed, they had been cleanly snipped. Serena's breath hitched. "What is that?" "That," Declan said, his voice grave, "is your main data harness. It connects the engine control unit to the transmission and fuel pumps. But it didn't just snap." He reached in and pulled the severed ends into the light. "Look at the cuts. Clean, symmetrical. Someone used a pair of aviation snips on this." The blood drained from Serena's face. "You're saying someone did this on purpose?" "I'm saying someone crawled under your car before you left, cut the harness, and reconnected it with a thermal bypass fuse," Declan explained, tracing the line. "When the engine reached a certain temperature, say during a steep mountain climb, the fuse melted, the connection severed, and the car died instantly. At 80 miles an hour on a cliffside road. You're lucky you didn't go over the edge." Serena stumbled back, her mind racing. Gideon. Gideon was the one who had insisted she take the car tonight. Gideon was the one who had sent her security detail ahead to prep the site. If she missed the meeting tomorrow, or worse, if she died in a tragic accident, the company bylaws dictated that the COO would take over the merger. Gideon would gain control of a $40 billion empire. "Oh my God," Serena whispered, leaning against the cold concrete wall. Her knees felt weak. The ruthless CEO facade crumbled in an instant, leaving behind a terrified woman who realized she was completely alone. "They tried to kill me." Just then, a small, sleepy voice broke the tension. "Daddy?" Serena spun around. Standing in the doorway of the small attached office was a little girl wearing oversized dinosaur pajamas. She was rubbing her eyes, clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit. Declan's entire demeanor shifted. The hardened, stoic mechanic vanished, replaced by a devastatingly gentle father. He quickly wiped the grease from his hands with a rag and walked over, crouching down to her level. "Hey, Bug. I'm sorry, did the truck wake you up?" he asked softly, brushing a stray curl of hair from Maria's forehead. "The thunder is loud," Maria mumbled, leaning her head on his shoulder. She peeked over at Serena. "Who is the pretty lady?" Serena froze, unaccustomed to being called pretty in such an innocent, unguarded way. In her world, compliments were currency, always carrying a hidden agenda. "That's Serena," Declan said, picking Maria up. "Her car broke down, so she's going to hang out here for a little while until the storm passes. Let's get you back to bed, okay?" As Declan carried his daughter up the narrow wooden stairs to their apartment, Serena watched them. She felt a strange ache in her chest. For all her billions, her sprawling estates, and her armies of employees, she didn't have anyone in her life who would look at her the way Declan looked at his daughter. 10 minutes later, Declan came back down. He walked straight to his massive red toolbox and began pulling out specialized wiring kits, a soldering iron, and a multimeter. "What are you doing?" Serena asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm fixing your car," Declan said, not looking up. "You said it was impossible without the factory codes." Declan walked over to the Koenigsegg and slid onto a creeper, rolling himself beneath the chassis. "It is impossible to rewrite the software," his voice echoed from under the car. "But I'm not going to rewrite it. I'm going to build a hardwired analog bridge to trick the ECU into thinking the harness is intact. It's going to take me all night, and it's going to be ugly, but it will get you to your building by 8 a.m. Serena stepped closer, staring at his boots sticking out from under the car. "Why? Why are you helping me? An hour ago you couldn't stand me." Declan paused. He rolled out slightly, looking up at her. The harsh overhead lights caught the exhaustion in his eyes, but also a fierce, unyielding moral compass. "Because someone tried to murder you tonight, Serena," he said, using her first name for the first time. The sound of it on his lips sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "And if you don't show up to that meeting tomorrow, the people who did this win. I don't care how much money you have. I don't let bullies win. Period." For the next 7 hours, Serena Croft watched a master at work. She didn't sleep. She sat on an overturned milk crate, wrapped in an old flannel shirt Declan had thrown to her, and watched him perform mechanical surgery. He barely spoke. He stripped wires as thin as human hair, soldering them together with the precision of a jeweler. When the car's security system triggered alarms, he bypassed them using ancient analog tricks, routing power from the taillights to keep the fuel pump primed. As the hours ticked by, the silence between them shifted from tense to intimate. Serena found herself mesmerized by the flex of the muscles in his forearms, the quiet intensity in his eyes, the sheer competence of a man who actually worked with his hands. In her world of empty promises and corporate jargon, Declan Wright was something shockingly real. At 6:30 a.m., the storm finally broke, giving way to a pale, misty dawn. Declan slid out from under the car, covered in sweat and grime. He stood up, wiping his hands on a towel, and walked over to the driver's side. He reached in and pressed the ignition button. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, with a vicious, ear-splitting roar, the twin-turbo V8 engine violently roared to life. The concrete floor of the shop literally vibrated. Serena gasped, jumping to her feet. She couldn't believe it. He had actually done it. He had hacked a $3 million hypercar with nothing but scrap wire, a soldering iron, and sheer brilliance. Declan killed the engine and leaned against the door, breathing heavily. He looked completely drained. "It'll hold," Declan said, his voice raspy. "But you can't push it past 60 and you have to drive smoothly. If you jar the suspension too hard, my bridge might snap." Serena walked toward him, a mixture of awe and profound gratitude washing over her. Declan, I don't even know how to thank you. I'll write you a check for whatever you want. 50,000? 100? Declan shook his head, a wry smile touching his lips. Keep your money, Serena. Just get to your meeting. Ruin their day. She looked at his mouth, suddenly acutely aware of how close they were standing. Her heart was hammering, and it wasn't just adrenaline from the sabotage. She remembered her taunt on the mountain. Fix this impossible machine by morning, and I'm yours. She reached out, her manicured hand gently touching his grease-stained forearm. Declan, I meant what I said earlier, not the insult. The other part. Before Declan could process the heavy implication in her eyes, his mechanic's instinct kicked in. A faint, sweet smell reached his nose. It wasn't the exhaust from the engine. It was distinct. Chemical. His eyes widened. He grabbed Serena by the shoulders and pushed her back, hard. Declan, what? Quiet, he snapped. He dropped to his knees, crawling towards the front left wheel well. He pulled a flashlight from his belt and clicked it on. Underneath the car, near the master brake cylinder, a small, dark puddle was slowly expanding on the concrete. Declan dipped his gloved finger into the liquid and held it to his nose. Hydraulic fluid. Damn it! Declan hissed, scrambling out from under the car. He ran to the toolbox, grabbing a crowbar. What is it? What's wrong? Serena panicked. The cut wire was just the stall, Declan said, his voice tight with rage. It was meant to stop you on the mountain, but whoever planned this had a failsafe. If you somehow got the car restarted and tried to drive down into the city, he wedged the crowbar behind the front wheel and pried the inner fender liner back. Attached to the steel-braided brake line was a small, rudimentary clamp made of cheap plastic. But inside the clamp was a glass vial, perfectly positioned so that when the steering wheel was turned sharply to the left, the mechanical pressure would crush the glass. Inside the glass was a highly corrosive industrial acid. If you drove this, Declan said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, the first sharp turn you took on the highway on-ramp would crush this vial. The acid would eat through the brake line in seconds. You'd be doing 60 miles an hour into downtown traffic with absolutely zero brakes. Serena stared at the small device, the reality of her impending death crashing down on her. Gideon hadn't just wanted her delayed. He wanted her obliterated. He wanted it to look like a tragic, catastrophic mechanical failure. She began to shake violently. The walls of the garage felt like they were closing in. The billionaire CEO, the untouchable titan of industry, finally broke. She covered her face with her hands, a jagged sob tearing from her throat. Declan didn't hesitate. He closed the distance between them and pulled her into his chest. He wrapped his strong, grease-stained arms around her shaking frame, anchoring her to the ground. I've got you, he murmured fiercely into her hair. You're safe here. I've got you. Serena clung to his shirt, burying her face against his chest. He smelled of sweat, motor oil, and absolute safety. For the first time in her life, she surrendered control. She let herself be held by a man who expected absolutely nothing from her. After a few minutes, her breathing slowed. She pulled back slightly, looking up into Declan's dark, resolute eyes. I have to get to that boardroom, Serena said, her voice shaking but hardening with a sudden lethal resolve. I have to walk through those doors at 8 o'clock and look Gideon Shaw in the eyes. You can't take the Koenigsegg, Declan said. Even if I remove the vial, I have to bleed and replace the entire brake system to make sure no acid seeped in. It's not safe. Serena looked at the clock on the wall. 7:15 a.m. Then how do I get there? She asked. Declan looked over at the battered, rusted tow truck sitting in the bay. He tossed the crowbar onto the workbench and pulled his keys from his pocket. We take my ride, Declan said, a dangerous smirk crossing his face. And I'm coming with you. Because whoever set this up is going to be in that room, and I want to see their face when a dead woman walks through the door. The first thing Declan did was secure the most important person in his life. He wrapped a heavy wool blanket around a sleeping Maria, carried her across the rain-slicked alley behind the shop, and knocked on the back door of Mrs. Gable's house. Martha Gable, a retired high school principal who treated Maria like her own granddaughter, opened the door in her dressing gown, taking one look at Declan's grim expression before ushering the child inside without a single question. "Keep the doors locked, Martha," Declan whispered, kissing his daughter's forehead. "I'll be back before lunch." When Declan returned to the garage, Serena was standing by the passenger side of his hulking, rusted International Harvester flatbed tow truck. The juxtaposition of the billionaire CEO in her mud-splattered Armani trench coat against the battered diesel-stained work vehicle was almost comical. But there was no humor in Serena's eyes. There was only a cold, terrifying calculation. The shock of her near murder had evaporated, replaced by the sheer, predatory instinct that had built Croft Innovations. Declan climbed into the driver's seat, the heavy diesel engine roaring to life with a puff of black smoke. Serena slid in beside him. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a sleek, shattered smartphone. "Still dead," she muttered, tossing it into the cup holder. "Gideon blocked the GPS tracking on my car and probably jammed the local cell towers near the ridge. He wanted me completely isolated." "He planned it well," Declan noted, shifting the heavy manual transmission into gear and pulling out onto the empty, storm-washed highway. The thermal fuse on the data harness was military-grade. The acid vial on the brake line was custom-blown. Whoever he hired to do the mechanical work wasn't some street thug. They knew exotic cars intimately. Serena looked over at him, the dashboard lights casting sharp shadows across his jawline. "You spotted it in 10 minutes. Who are you, Declan?" "Really? Guys who run cinderblock garages on the edge of town don't usually know how to hotwire a Koenigsegg's mainframe or identify thermal bypass fuses." Declan kept his eyes on the road, the massive windshield wipers slapping away the morning mist. For a moment, he didn't answer. He navigated a treacherous curve on Highway 101, the Golden Gate Bridge looming in the distance through the fog. "Before Maria was born, I wasn't towing cars," Declan said quietly. "I was a lead telemetry engineer for a Le Mans endurance racing team in Europe. We spent millions shaving fractions of a second off lap times. I built engine control units from scratch. But the travel, it was 300 days a year on the road. When my ex-wife walked out, I had a choice. Keep chasing trophies in Monaco or be a father. So I packed up my tools, moved back here, and opened the shop. It doesn't pay like racing did, but I get to make Maria pancakes every morning. That's worth more than any podium." Serena stared at him, genuinely stunned. In her world, ambition was the only god. People sacrificed their families, their health, and their morals for a fraction of the success Declan had voluntarily walked away from. "You gave up a world-class engineering career to run a tow truck?" she asked, her voice soft with disbelief. "I gave up a job to raise my daughter," Declan corrected, glancing at her. "No offense, Serena, but the corporate ladder is a lonely place to die. I've seen enough rich men drinking themselves to sleep in luxury hotels to know that." His words hit her like a physical blow. She thought of her massive, empty penthouse overlooking the city. She thought of the friends who were only in her contacts list for leverage. She thought of Gideon, her trusted second-in-command, actively trying to put her in a body bag for a larger stock option. "You're right," she whispered, looking out the window as the sprawling skyline of San Francisco came into view. By 7:45 a.m., the morning traffic in the financial district was a gridlock of Blacktown cars, Ubers, and frantic commuters. Declan didn't care. He laid on the deafening air horn of the International Harvester, parting the sea of luxury sedans like a rusted Moses. He pulled the massive tow truck right up onto the polished granite curb outside 555 California Street, one of the most prestigious corporate skyscrapers on the West Coast. A team of valet attendants and security guards immediately rushed the truck, waving their arms frantically. "Hey, you can't park that piece of junk here," the head of security barked, slapping the side of the flatbed. "This is a private loading zone for executives only. Move it or I'm calling the police." Declan killed the engine and pushed the heavy door open. He stepped down onto the pavement, towering over the security guard. In his grease-stained work boots, faded jeans, and a heavily worn jacket, he looked like a wrecking ball primed for demolition. "Call them," Declan said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "In fact, call the detectives. You're going to need them." Before the guard could respond, the passenger door swung open. Serena Croft stepped out. Her hair was a mess, her designer coat was smeared with grease and mud, and there was a streak of motor oil across her cheek. But the look in her eyes made the security guards freeze in absolute terror. "Miss Croft," the head guard stammered, his face turning pale. We were told you were missing. Mr. Shaw said—" "Mr. Shaw is about to have a very bad morning," Serena interrupted, her voice slicing through the morning air like a scalpel. She didn't wait for a response. She strode toward the spinning glass doors of the lobby, radiating an aura of pure, unadulterated vengeance. Declan grabbed a heavy-duty lockbox from behind his seat and followed right behind her, matching her fierce, determined pace. The billionaire and the mechanic walked into the gleaming marble lobby, and for the first time in her life, Serena felt completely invincible. The executive boardroom on the 52nd floor was a masterpiece of intimidation. A 40-foot table carved from a single slab of reclaimed mahogany dominated the room, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the bay. At exactly 7:55 a.m., Gideon Shaw stood at the head of the table. He was impeccably dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. He looked solemn, playing the role of the devastated colleague to perfection. Seated around the table were the heaviest hitters in the financial world. There were senior partners from Kirkland and Ellis, the ruthless law firm handling the merger contracts. Across from them sat 3 principal auditors from Deloitte, their laptops open and ready. At the far end were the representatives from Apex Dynamics, the rival tech firm Croft Innovations was absorbing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gideon said, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion, "I appreciate you all being here. As you know, Serena Croft has not arrived. We have been unable to reach her since last night. Local authorities have found her GPS signal lost in the mountain pass, which suffered severe mudslides during the storm." A murmur of shock and concern rippled through the lawyers and auditors. "While we pray for her safe return," Gideon continued, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye, "the market waits for no one. Clause 4A of our corporate charter dictates that in the event of the CEO's sudden absence or incapacitation, executive authority immediately transfers to the chief operating officer. For the stability of the company and to honor Serena's life's work, I am prepared to sign the merger documents today as acting CEO." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a gold Montblanc pen, and leaned over the thick stack of contracts. "I wouldn't cap that pen just yet, Gideon." The heavy oak double doors of the boardroom violently banged open, slamming against the walls with a sound like a gunshot. The entire room jumped. Gideon dropped his pen, his jaw going slack as all the color drained from his face. Serena Croft stood in the doorway. She looked like she had just walked out of a war zone. Mud coated her boots, her coat was ruined, and her eyes were burning with a lethal fire. Standing right behind her was Declan, holding a heavy steel lockbox, his imposing frame blocking the only exit. "Serena!" Gideon choked out, his voice cracking. He tried to quickly plaster a look of relief on his face, but his eyes were darting toward the windows in sheer panic. "My God, you're alive! We thought you were caught in the mudslide." "Did you?" Serena asked, her heels clicking ominously against the hardwood floor as she walked slowly toward the table. "Is that why you canceled my private security detail last night? Is that why you insisted I take the Koenigsegg instead of the armored SUV?" The partners from Kirkland and Ellis exchanged alarmed glances. One of the lead attorneys closed his portfolio. "Miss Croft, what is going on here?" "Corporate restructuring," Serena said coldly. She reached the head of the table and stared Gideon down. "Gideon here was just trying to expedite his promotion by burying me in a ravine." "That is an outrageous accusation," Gideon shouted, his panic turning into defensive rage. He looked at the executives around the table. She's clearly in shock. The storm must have caused a collision. She's hysterical. Security! Don't bother. Declan's deep voice echoed through the room. He stepped forward, setting the heavy steel lockbox on the pristine mahogany table. He flipped the latches and opened the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of shop rags, was the severed wire harness with the melted thermal fuse and the custom plastic clamp holding the unbroken vial of highly corrosive acid. Declan looked directly at the Kirkland and Ellis's lawyers. "I'm a master mechanic," Declan stated, his tone flat and unyielding. Ms. Croft's vehicle didn't suffer a malfunction. The main data harness was intentionally severed and rerouted through a heat-sensitive bypass fuse designed to stall the car on the steepest part of the mountain. And this, he pointed to the clamp, was rigged to the master brake line. If she had managed to restart the car, the first sharp turn of the steering wheel would have crushed this vial, dumping industrial acid onto the hydraulic lines. She would have lost all braking power at highway speeds. Dead silence fell over the boardroom. The Deloitte auditors slowly pushed their chairs back from the table. "Attempted murder," the lead attorney murmured, staring at the evidence. "You can't prove anything," Gideon spat, sweat beading on his forehead. "Some mechanic finds a broken wire and suddenly I'm an assassin? You have absolutely no proof that I had anything to do with her car." Serena leaned over the table, her face inches from Gideon's. "I don't need to prove you touched the car, Gideon," she whispered, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Because while Declan was busy saving my life, I used his landline to call my offshore forensic accounting team in Geneva, the ones you didn't know I hired." Gideon's eyes widened in sheer horror. "I know about the shell company in the Cayman Islands," Serena continued, her voice rising so everyone in the room could hear. "I know about the $40 million short position you took against our own stock 3 days ago. If I died, the stock would plummet, the merger would pause, and you would cash out hundreds of millions before the board even voted you in." She snapped her fingers, looking at the stunned executives. "Check your phones. I just forwarded the wire transfer receipts to all of you." A chorus of buzzing phones erupted around the table. The senior partner from Kirkland and Ellis looked at his screen, his expression hardening into stone. He looked up at Gideon. "Mr. Shaw," the attorney said icily, "our firm no longer represents you. I highly suggest you do not speak another word without criminal defense counsel." The sound of police sirens wailed from the streets far below, growing rapidly louder. Serena had called the San Francisco Police Department from the tow truck halfway across the Golden Gate Bridge. Gideon looked at the door, then at Declan, who simply crossed his massive arms over his chest, daring the executive to try and run. The fight completely drained out of Gideon. He collapsed into his leather chair, burying his face in his hands as the realization of his ruined life crashed down upon him. Serena turned away from him in disgust. She looked at the remaining executives, straightening her ruined Armani coat, perfectly composed. "Gentlemen," Serena announced, her voice echoing with absolute authority, "the police will be here in approximately 60 seconds to remove this trash from my building. After the room is thoroughly sanitized, we will proceed with the signing of this merger. Does anyone have a problem with that?" No one dared to breathe a word of dissent. The Queen had reclaimed her throne. The aftermath was a blur of flashing red and blue lights, stern-faced detectives, and frantic corporate damage control. SFPD major crimes detectives hauled a handcuffed, pale-faced Gideon out through the private freight elevator to avoid the press. The boardroom was temporarily cleared, leaving only a heavy, ringing silence in the wake of the chaos. Serena retreated to her private executive office, a sprawling suite of glass, white leather, and modern art on the top floor. She bypassed her wet bar and poured 2 cups of black coffee from a sleek espresso machine, carrying them over to where Declan stood. He was looking out the massive floor-to-ceiling window, watching the ant-like traffic moving through the concrete canyons of San Francisco. In this ultra-sterile, high-powered environment, Declan looked entirely out of place, yet simultaneously like the most solid, real thing in the room. "Black, no sugar," Serena said, handing him a mug. "Assuming you don't take it with oat milk and agave like everyone else in this building." Declan took the mug, a faint smirk touching his tired eyes. "Thanks." Serena walked over to her massive glass desk and leaned against it, crossing her arms. She looked at him. Really looked at him. The adrenaline was finally fading, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion, but also an electric, undeniable awareness of the man standing in front of her. He had seen her at her absolute lowest, terrified and weeping on a dirty garage floor, and he hadn't judged her. He had just protected her. "The police are going to need a formal statement from you," Serena said softly. "They've taken the lockbox to the crime lab. Between the physical evidence and the offshore accounts, Gideon is looking at 20 years in federal prison." "Good," Declan said, taking a sip of the coffee. "Men like that, they think they can buy their way out of consequences. It's nice to see one hit a brick wall." Serena set her coffee down and walked slowly toward him. The space between them felt highly charged, crackling with an unspoken tension. "I meant what I said last night, Declan," she said, her voice dropping to a vulnerable register that no one in this building had ever heard. "You saved my life. You saved my life's work. I can write you a check right now that would guarantee Maria's college tuition, buy you the best racing shop in the country, and set you up for life. Just name your price." Declan sighed, setting his mug on the windowsill. He looked down at her, his expression gentle but unyielding. "Serena, we talked about this. I don't want your money." "Then what do you want?" she asked, taking a half-step closer. She looked up into his eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs. She remembered her own words on the mountain, the sarcastic taunt that now felt entirely prophetic. "Fix this impossible machine by morning, and I'm yours." Declan held her gaze. For a second, his eyes dropped to her lips, and Serena felt a jolt of pure fire shoot through her veins. But then, the hardened discipline of the single father returned. He took a respectful step back. "I want to go back to my garage," Declan said softly. "I want to pick up my daughter from Martha's house. I want to wash this grease off my hands, and I want to sleep for 14 hours. Serena felt a sharp pang of disappointment, but also a deep wave of respect. He wasn't like the sycophants who surrounded her. He couldn't be bought, and he couldn't be seduced by power. "I see," Serena said, trying to mask the hurt in her voice. "So that's it? You ride in, slay the dragon, and drive back to the suburbs?" "You don't need me anymore, Serena," Declan pointed out, gesturing to the sprawling city below them. "You're the CEO. You've got a billion-dollar merger to sign, a company to rebuild, and a board to terrify. You belong up here." He looked down at his own worn boots. "I belong on the ground." He walked toward the door of the office. Serena watched him go, her chest tightening. "Declan," she called out before he reached the handle. He stopped and looked back. "My Koenigsegg is still sitting in your garage," she said, a faint, desperate smile on her face. "It needs a new brake line and a new data harness." Declan's lips twitched into a genuine smile. "It's going to take me a few weeks to source those parts from Sweden. I'll have to charge you double for the labor." "I'll pay it," she replied instantly. "Will you call me when it's ready?" "I'll call you," Declan promised. He opened the door and walked out, leaving Serena alone in her glass tower. For the first time in years, the silence of her office didn't feel empowering. It just felt lonely. She walked back to her desk, picking up her newly provided replacement tablet to review the morning's emails. The police had successfully decrypted Gideon's personal phone and sent a preliminary data dump to her security chief. Serena opened the file, scrolling past encrypted text logs between Gideon and the hitman he had hired to rig the car. But as she scrolled down to the financial ledger, her blood suddenly ran cold. Gideon hadn't just shorted the stock with his own money. The $40 million capital required to manipulate Croft Innovations' shares had been wired into his account 48 hours ago. She traced the routing number, her fingers trembling over the glass screen. The money didn't come from a faceless bank. It came from a private equity firm managed by Vanguard, originating from an account held by a man she hadn't spoken to in 5 years, Cameron Vance, her ex-fiancé. The ruthless venture capitalist she had utterly destroyed in a hostile takeover early in her career. Gideon was just a pawn. Cameron was the one funding the assassination, and if Cameron knew that Gideon had failed and was sitting in police custody, he would realize his proxy war was over. He would have to handle Serena himself. Serena stared at the tablet, the cold reality of her world closing back in around her. The war wasn't over. It had just escalated. And as she looked out the window, watching Declan's rusty tow truck pull out onto the busy San Francisco street far below, she realized that despite her billions, he was the only man she could truly trust to keep her alive. The realization that Cameron Cole was the architect of her attempted murder paralyzed Serena for exactly 10 seconds. Then, the predatory instincts that made her a billionaire kicked back in. Cameron wasn't just a scorned ex-fiancé. He was a ruthless venture capitalist who operated in the shadows, using shell companies and proxies to dismantle his rivals. If he knew Gideon had been arrested, he would assume Serena had the evidence. He wouldn't wait for the police to connect the dots. He would send professionals to finish the job. Serena didn't call her corporate security. Gideon had compromised the entire team, and she didn't know who she could trust. She grabbed her replacement tablet, shoved it into her ruined trench coat, and walked out of her office. She bypassed the private elevator, taking the service stairs down to the underground parking garage. She didn't take a company car. Instead, she found a terrified junior analyst getting into a dented Honda Civic and handed the kid her diamond Rolex in exchange for the keys. 45 minutes later, the Civic rattled down the cracked asphalt of the industrial district, pulling up to the cinder block building of Wright & Daughter Auto. The heavy bay doors were open. The afternoon sun cut through the dust motes in the air, illuminating the garage in a warm, golden haze. Declan was underneath a beat-up Chevy Silverado, the rhythmic sound of a socket wrench echoing off the walls. Sitting on a stool nearby, wearing a pair of oversized safety goggles, was Maria. She was carefully sorting a bucket of lug nuts by size. Serena killed the engine and stepped out. The sudden silence made Maria look up. The little girl's face broke into a wide smile, recognizing the woman from the storm. "The pretty lady came back," Maria announced, hopping off the stool. The ratcheting sound stopped. Declan slid out from under the truck on his creeper. He was wearing a fresh white t-shirt that was already smudged with grease, his arms corded with muscle from fighting rusted bolts all afternoon. When he saw Serena, his expression shifted from casual surprise to immediate, razor-sharp concern. He saw the tension radiating from her rigid posture, the pale fear beneath her composed mask. Declan stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. He walked over to Maria, gently taking the safety goggles off her head. "Hey, Bug, why don't you go into the office and put on your favorite cartoon? I need to talk to Serena about her car." "Okay," Maria chirped. She paused, looking up at Serena. "Do you like dinosaurs?" The innocence of the question pierced straight through Serena's armor. The terror of the last few hours receded, just for a moment, replaced by a profound warmth. "I love dinosaurs," Serena said, her voice surprisingly soft. "Especially the T-Rex." Maria beamed and scurried into the office, pulling the heavy door shut behind her. Declan closed the distance between them. He didn't ask how her meeting went or why she was driving a beat-up compact car. He looked directly into her eyes and asked the only question that mattered. "Who is coming for you?" Serena let out a shaky breath, stepping closer to him. The smell of motor oil and sawdust was intoxicatingly grounding. Gideon was a puppet. The man funding the sabotage, the one who paid for the hit, is an ex-fiancé of mine, Cameron Cole. He's a venture capitalist with bottomless pockets and connections to the absolute worst people in the corporate underworld. The police have Gideon, but Cameron is still out there. And if he finds out the proxy failed, he'll send a cleanup crew," Declan finished, his jaw tightening. "I couldn't trust my security detail," Serena admitted, her voice finally breaking. She hated feeling helpless, hated showing weakness, but standing in front of this man, the facade crumbled. "I didn't know where else to go, Declan. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought this to your door. I shouldn't have put you and Maria in danger." She turned to leave, guilt washing over her. But before she could take a step, Declan's large, calloused hand wrapped gently around her wrist. "Stop!" he commanded, his voice a low, steady rumble. He pulled her back, not forcefully, but with an undeniable gravity. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do. You came to the one place they don't know about, and you're not leaving." "Declan, you don't understand," Serena pleaded, looking up at his resolute face. "Cameron doesn't send lawyers. He sends men who make people disappear." "Let them come," Declan said, his eyes darkening with a dangerous protective fire. He released her wrist and walked over to the massive red toolbox against the wall. He hit a hidden switch underneath the steel lip. The heavy pegboard behind the toolbox slid open, revealing a hidden alcove. Inside was a pristine, customized tactical shotgun and a heavy steel lockbox containing flares, a heavy-duty nail gun, and industrial zip ties. Serena stared at the hidden arsenal, her jaw dropping. "I thought you were a mechanic." "I am," Declan said, loading heavy, slug-filled shells into the shotgun with practiced, chilling efficiency. "But before I was an engineer in Europe, I was a mechanic for a Marine Corps expeditionary unit in Fallujah. I fix things, Serena. But when someone threatens my family, or the people under my roof, I break things just as well." He slammed the action shut, the metallic clack echoing through the garage like a thunderclap. He looked at her, his expression utterly fearless. "Welcome to my world." The attack came just after dusk. The industrial park was a ghost town on the weekends, the surrounding warehouses dark and abandoned. Declan had spent the last 2 hours securing the perimeter. He moved the heavy International Harvester tow truck to block the main bay doors, creating a steel barricade. He sent Maria upstairs to the apartment with strict instructions to hide in the cast-iron bathtub with her tablet and noise-canceling headphones. Serena sat in the darkened office, monitoring the perimeter cameras Declan had hardwired around the shop. She watched the black, unmarked SUV roll down the alleyway, cutting its headlights 50 yards from the garage. "3 men," Serena whispered into a 2-way radio Declan had given her. "Tactical gear. They're moving toward the side entrance." "Copy that." Declan's voice crackled back, calm and steady. "Stay low. Do not leave the office." The heavy steel side door of the garage suddenly groaned. There was a sharp hiss of a thermal breaching torch, and the deadbolt melted into slag. The door kicked open, and 3 men in dark clothing stepped into the cavernous, pitch-black garage. They raised suppressed submachine guns, sweeping the area with mounted flashlights. They expected a terrified billionaire. They got a ghost. Declan was perched on the steel rafters 15 feet above the floor. He didn't use the shotgun right away. Gunfire would draw too much attention too quickly. Instead, he reached into his tool belt and pulled out a heavy 2-pound pneumatic wrench. As the lead gunman stepped directly under the hydraulic car lift, Declan threw a switch on the wall panel using a rigged pulley wire. With a deafening hiss of compressed air, the massive steel arms of the hydraulic lift dropped violently, slamming into the lead gunman and pinning him flat against the concrete floor. The man screamed, dropping his weapon. The other 2 spun around, firing blindly into the shadows. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off engine blocks and steel cabinets. Declan dropped from the rafters, landing silently on the roof of a parked sedan. He vaulted off the hood, launching himself at the second gunman. With terrifying speed, Declan drove his elbow into the man's throat, grabbing the barrel of his weapon and twisting it upward. He swept the man's legs out from under him, sending him crashing into a rack of heavy tires. The third gunman finally tracked Declan's movement. He raised his weapon, the laser sight painting a red dot on Declan's chest. "Click, Mockern." The gunman looked down. He had stepped directly onto a heavy-duty industrial grease trap that Declan had unsealed. Before the man could pull the trigger, his boots slipped out from under him. He flailed wildly, falling backward and cracking his skull violently against the edge of an anvil. He went limp. Silence descended on the garage, save for the hissing of the air compressor and the groans of the pinned man. Declan stood up, breathing heavily, his eyes scanning the darkness. He walked over to the pinned gunman, kicking his weapon away. Suddenly, the slow, mocking sound of clapping echoed from the open side door. Cameron Cole stepped into the garage. He was wearing an immaculate bespoke suit, looking completely out of place amidst the oil and blood. He stepped over his unconscious men with a look of mild disgust. In his hand, he held a sleek, silver pistol. "I have to admit," Cameron drawled, aiming the gun at Declan's chest. "When Gideon failed, I assumed Serena would run to the FBI. I didn't think she would hide behind a grease monkey in a junkyard. You put up a good fight, mechanic, but you brought a wrench to a gunfight." Declan didn't flinch. He just stared at Cameron with cold, calculating eyes. "You're trespassing." Cameron laughed. "And you're about to be a tragic casualty of a robbery gone wrong. Now call her out. I know she's here." "I'm right here, Cameron." Serena's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. She stepped out of the office shadows into the dim light of the garage. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't hiding. She stood tall, holding the replacement tablet in her hand. Cameron sneered. "Serena, always so dramatic. Did you really think you could take my company, ruin my reputation, and just walk away? This is just business, darling. A hostile takeover." "It's over, Cameron," Serena said smoothly. She tapped the screen of the tablet. "Gideon flipped. The police raided your shell company in the Caymans 20 minutes ago. And while your goons were trying to breach the door, I used this garage's hard line to transfer the complete ledger of your illegal shortings to the SEC, the FBI, and the board of directors at Vanguard. Your accounts are frozen. You have absolutely nothing left." Cameron's smug expression faltered. The blood drained from his face. "You're lying. You couldn't have bypassed the encryption." "I run a tech empire, you idiot," Serena snapped, her eyes blazing with absolute dominance. "I built the encryption." Enraged, Cameron raised the pistol, aiming it directly at Serena's head. "Then I'll just have to settle for revenge." He pulled the trigger. Underklick dots. Nothing happened. Cameron stared at his gun in shock. He pulled the trigger again. Click. Click. Declan stepped forward, holding up a small, heavy piece of metal in his palm. It was a firing pin. "Your driver was waiting in the alley in the SUV," Declan said, his voice dripping with lethal calm. "While you were waiting for your men to clear the room, I slipped out the back window. I knocked your driver out, took your spare weapon from the glove box, and removed the firing pin. You walked in here with a paperweight." Panic finally seized Cameron. He threw the useless gun at Declan and turned to run. He didn't make it 2 steps. Declan lunged forward, grabbing Cameron by the collar of his $1,000 suit. With a brutal display of strength, Declan spun the venture capitalist around and slammed him face first into the hood of the broken-down Silverado. He grabbed a pair of heavy-duty industrial zip ties from his belt and secured Cameron's hands behind his back, pulling them so tight Cameron screamed in pain. Red and blue lights suddenly strobed through the frosted windows of the garage. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing deafeningly loud as half a dozen SFPD cruisers swarmed the alleyway. Declan stepped back from the hood, looking at the utterly defeated, sobbing executive. He turned to Serena, wiping a smudge of grease from his cheek. "Your ride is here," Declan said quietly. Serena looked at the police cars, then at the man who had just dismantled an assassination squad with pneumatic tools and zip ties. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind an overwhelming, undeniable truth. She didn't want the ride. She wanted the mechanic. The next 2 weeks were a hurricane of corporate warfare and legal proceedings. With Gideon and Cameron in federal custody, Croft Innovations underwent a massive, brutal restructuring. Serena cleaned house. She fired the sycophants, dissolved the predatory acquisitions department, and instituted a new ethical charter that sent shockwaves through Wall Street. She signed the merger, but on her terms, securing billions in valuation while protecting the jobs of thousands of middle-class workers. She was hailed as the undisputed queen of the tech world. Magazine covers called her the Iron CEO, but sitting in her sprawling penthouse, looking out over the glittering city lights, Serena felt a profound emptiness. She hadn't seen Declan since the night of the attack. He had given his statement to the police, packed up his truck, and vanished back into the quiet rhythm of his life. He hadn't called. He hadn't asked for a reward. Serena looked at her reflection in the glass. For 34 years, she had chased power, believing it was the only armor that could keep her safe. But the only time she had ever felt truly secure, truly seen, was on the grease-stained floor of a cinder-block garage. It was time to make a real executive decision. The following Saturday afternoon, the sun was shining brightly over Wright and Daughter Auto. Declan was under the hood of a vintage Mustang, covered in oil, sweating through his shirt. Maria was sitting on the hood, eating a popsicle and babbling about her cartoon. And then the T-Rex roared. But he wasn't mean, he just wanted to be friends, Maria explained enthusiastically. Is that right? Declan smiled, tightening a belt. Sounds like a misunderstood guy. A shadow fell over the driveway. Declan looked up, expecting a customer. His breath caught in his throat. Serena was standing in the doorway. But she wasn't wearing an Armani trench coat or designer heels. She was wearing a simple pair of faded jeans, a white t-shirt, and comfortable sneakers. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail. She looked radiant. She looked real. "Serena!" Maria cheered, jumping down from the car and running over. Serena dropped to one knee, catching the little girl in a warm, genuine hug. "Hey, Maria, how are the dinosaurs doing?" "Good. Daddy is fixing a noisy car." Declan slowly wiped his hands on a rag, stepping out from behind the Mustang. He couldn't take his eyes off her. The fierce, untouchable billionaire was gone, replaced by a woman who looked like she finally belonged somewhere. "What are you doing here, Serena?" Declan asked, his voice thick with an emotion he was desperately trying to suppress. "I saw the news. The merger went through. You're the most powerful woman in the state." Serena stood up, walking slowly toward him. "Power is exhausting, Declan. I spent my whole life building a fortress of money to keep people out. But when the walls actually crumbled, you were the only one who stood in the rubble with me." She stopped inches away from him. The smell of motor oil and sawdust hit her, and it felt like coming home. "I stepped down as CEO this morning," Serena said softly. Declan stared at her, genuinely shocked. You walked away from a $40 billion empire?" "I retained my board seat and my equity," she smiled, a playful glint in her eye. "I'm still obscenely wealthy, Declan. I'm just not married to the boardroom anymore. I hired a new CEO to run the day-to-day, because I realized I was missing out on life." She reached out, gently placing her hand on his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it beating, strong and steady against her palm. "My Koenigsegg is still sitting in the corner of your shop," Serena whispered, looking up into his dark, magnetic eyes. "You said it would take a few weeks to fix." Declan swallowed hard, his own walls finally crumbling. He looked down at her lips, the restraint he had held onto for weeks completely shattering. "The parts came in yesterday, but I haven't started. It's a complex machine. It requires a lot of attention. I have a proposition for you, Mr. Wright," Serena breathed, leaning in closer, closing the final inch between them. "Fix that impossible machine." And you're mine," Declan finished, his voice a ragged whisper. He didn't wait for her to agree. Declan wrapped his strong, grease-stained arms around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest, and crashed his lips onto hers. Serena gasped into the kiss, wrapping her arms around his neck. The kiss was desperate, fierce, and incredibly tender all at once. It tasted like coffee, sweat, and absolute salvation. In that single electrifying moment, the billionaire and the mechanic ceased to exist. There was only a man who had sworn to protect, and a woman who had finally learned to trust. From the office door, Maria peeked out, giggling as she covered her eyes. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathing heavily, Serena rested her forehead against his chest, a brilliant, uncontrollable smile spreading across her face. Declan kissed the top of her head, holding her tight against him. He looked out over his humble garage, at his daughter, and at the woman who had just traded an empire for a cinder-block sanctuary. "So," Declan murmured, a smirk playing on his lips. "Do you know how to change a spark plug?" Serena laughed, the sound ringing clear and bright through the garage. "No, but I hear I have the best teacher in the world. If this intense story of survival, betrayal, and unexpected love kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories where ordinary heroes take on extraordinary odds. Want to see more dramas like Declan and Serena's? Share this video with your friends and let us know in the comments below. Would you have walked away from a billion-dollar empire for true love and a peaceful life? Drop your thoughts and we'll see you in the next gripping tale.